Hello again, this is Tim, and welcome to Fix It in Post, where our topics are basically all things about editing in production, film and video production, television, or your home production for that matter. Uh, Today's topic is the democratization of production, and that, which is to say, things have become so simplified that almost anybody can pick up a phone, go to the video application on the phone, which is an app, short for application, dial it up very quickly and start live streaming. That used to require the amount of equipment they used to be required to do that is phenomenal. And actually is still in use today at the professional end, at the high end. Say like live streaming a football game, for instance, is not the same as sitting there with your phone and live streaming. It's quite demanding. And they have entire trucks of equipment devoted to making sure that happens properly, so you can watch your football games live on Sunday and Monday night. And that's one example of the democratization. But if you want to do a live stream of, say, an event that you're having, you can pretty much dial it up on your phone and use something like Periscope or maybe even YouTube to do that. And so right there you have a tremendous amount of power at your fingertips in the sense of getting your message out or your event out or your whatever that is that you're doing with your video content. So we'll start with basically everything that's going on today in digital production, which includes everything from your phone to the high end, the very high end of digital production in studios and such, owes itself to film. And this is an example of film. It's literally, this is a Super 8mm film. It's very small. The image that's recorded on a single frame of Super 8mm film is smaller than my pinky nail there. It's about half to 2/3 that size on Super. That's on Super 8, which is the larger of the 8mm formats. And then as you can see here, this is probably about 15 or 20 minutes of film when it's put in a projector and rolled through and projected one frame at a time at either 18 or 24 frames per second. So as you can see, film is quite different than video. Video has a number of things that film, number of characteristics film doesn't have. For instance, this is an example of 35mm film. You can see that dark square there. This is negative film. That dark square there is one frame of 35mm film. How much information is there in that one frame of 35mm film? Tremendous amount of information. It's better than 4K. I think it's roughly equivalent to somewhere between 8 and 12K and 8 and 12K image resolution at today's rates. And depending on the type of film you're using, it could be even higher. So film used to be like when you would go to the theater and watch your favorite movie on that large screen. Those were the images that were being projected. They were a little wider than your standard 35mm film, say from your mom or dad's film camera or your grandmother's film camera. And those would play through at about 24 frames a second, I believe. I think it's 24 frames a second for film. And the reels on feature films were huge. They're really big. They come in boxes like this, like a feature film would be in two cases of reels about that big, that wide, and then those would get assembled at the theater, and then the reels that they ran through the projectors there were almost as big around as I can reach. They're just huge. You know, they literally physically cut those together and project those one frame at a time so you can watch your movie. And audio was synced to that. Most of the time, I believe it was on a sync track that ran with the film. Sometimes it was right on the film. So they had to be very careful with cutting, or you could miss some of your audio if the audio was printed right on the film. Speaking of cutting, this is where the word editing, this is where we get the phrase in editing about the word cutting. Film has some very unique qualities. This is a guillotine. I believe it's a 16mm guillotine. And literally to use this, to edit 16mm film, I would open this, put my desired frame right there, lock it. I would open this, put my match frame desired right there, and I would lock that. Now, when this comes down, I've just cut this piece of film right here. So I take that and made it with its, with my source. And then I lift this up. And if I have a tail here, I've already cut that off when I set this one down. So now I have these two pieces of film very carefully matched. So there's just enough room between them where I can lift this up, put a piece of tape across the two, which will not interfere in any way with the projection. And it's transparent tape, very strong. And then take that film out of there, and I have just created an edit. So it's very physical, a very tactile process, very visual too, because on a professional system, this is just like a home system. On a professional system, behind it would be a light box, and you would have a little screen in front of it. So you're literally looking at the analog, at the actual image that you're cutting, the two images you're cutting together on that screen. And that was called the guillotine back in the day. So yeah, completely different process than what we're doing here. Before I move on, let me show you a little bit more about film, because I was a still photographer as well. This is 35, actually much bigger than 35. This is medium format film. It's 6 by 4.5 centimeters. And say, like, for instance, that's one frame, that's a frame. This carries probably about 4 or 5 times more information than a 35 millimeter frame. And then we're just going to keep moving on here in the progression. This is 4-inch by 5-inch film. That's 4 images. And you can imagine the amount of information that's carried in one frame of this. And this, just for you aficionados out there, this is an 8 by 10 piece of film. This is an image that was created many years ago. It's just sitting in my archive. And I did a lot of still photography back in the day. That's, like you say, a 35 millimeter piece of film is only about that much information down there in the corner, and that meets or exceeds 8 to 12K today, depending on which stock was shot and how it was shot. So imagine the amount of information that's on this one piece of film. And if you've ever been to before they all went digital, if they've gone digital yet, like at Cinemax or any of those, the big CinemaScope places where you can go and watch that one frame right there, that's about the size, only a little more horizontal. They've stretched it and they shoot horizontally, so it's maybe the size of 1.5 to 2 of those. Is about the size you get with the old wide screen projection techniques. And those cameras are huge, they're monstrous, and they require entire crews to operate just the camera and keep everything in register and loaded, and those were very complicated shoots. The key takeaway is that digital has simplified this process enormously. Digital production has simplified the professional end of it enormously. It's still very cumbersome. It still requires a crew of technicians to run a sophisticated digital camera, which is to say not your phone, although your phone is very sophisticated. And there are still considerations. But suffice to say that all these things, all of these various things come into play. Now, with film, there's always a little more resolution on the film, as we can see, than you're going to get out of a digital image, out of a digital transfer from the film. So you can keep the old 35 millimeter films when there's a new technology that comes out to read them and say correct the error corrections and the scratch and blotch removals and that sort of thing. They'll rescan classic films, assuming that there's a good copy of that film left. They'll rescan the film and restore it to where what artists believe looked more closely to the original. And I have seen some examples of this in the theaters, and they just look incredible. So whenever new technology comes along, you can go back to an old film, which hardly anybody has film projectors anymore. There's a few actual projection, houses, and they can retransfer those images and create a new copy of that film. Create a new copy. There's one of the neighborhood kiddies watching me. Oh my goodness. I've got an audience, a live audience. Okay. So anyway, and it, just as an aside, we used to have to use things like this, because with film had a speed. It had a speed. Your cameras had various settings for iris openings and various speed adjustments and registers and things like that. This is a spot meter. We would take it and look very carefully in here at one small area. Let's say there's a shadow and I want to see some detail in that shadow. Well, I can get a direct reading on that shadow part of the image that we're taking. It's maybe part of a much larger frame. Go to my reading, which came out in Foot-Lambert's right here. I would say, what was my reading? Okay, so if my desired ratio is 60:1 and my reading is 4 lumens, okay, well, that's, there we go. So we'd have to take and do some math and do some, some of the physics of light and figure out what's our exposure, what's our proper exposure, shooting 24 frames a second to get detail in that shadow without blowing everything else in the image out. And that's, you still run into this problem today in digital. Like, if you want detail in the shadow images, you have to expose for the shadows. You have to light and expose for the shadows, because if you just take an image that was shot without that consideration and you're like, well, I need to see something, it's down there in this dark part of the image, and you go to your editor and they try to pull it up and it's not there in the software, you can't see it in the software. The reason for that is because your noise floor is too high. In the image floor, the black levels are matching the noise floor. And so you can't have detail in an image like that. There's only so much you can do with it. You can lighten the shadow, or you can just kind of pretend it doesn't exist, but you can't, without going into special effects and or graphics, you can't really, you'd have to actually add something in there to get a detail that you don't have. And that's beyond the scope of what we do. That's more into the graphics and effects. So if you got a lot of budget, you can still go ahead and make that shot work, because you'll have to hire the graphics people to put that back into the image. And if you don't, you're going to have to kind of live with your shot. So all the physics of film still matter. The physics of shooting film still matter in digital. Anything that's in there right at the same level, any detail that's in there at the same level as your noise floor, or up here way high in the white area at your luminance area, any detail that's just clipped and exceeded by your luminance, you're not going to have anything in those parts of the image. That's when you get solid white and or more or less solid black, and or if you try to amplify that, you'll just get noise. You get digital noise. So these concepts do hold true, and they hold true for all of us, not just some of us. But that's the basics. I'm going to